It's not possible to not be religious.
Right, exactly.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to acknowledge at the outset two things. First of all, that some people's allergy to religion is because of something very, very terrible happened to them at the hands of a quote-unquote religious figure.
That's true,
And we have to acknowledge that and say that that's evil and that should not have happened. And it's a great injustice that anybody had to experience anything like that. In that sense, it is maybe understandable.
Understandable for sure. Yeah.
And our hearts go out to anybody who's been affected in such a tragic way. The other thing is that I try very hard not to think about these things polemically in terms of like, well, this is the right thing to believe and this is the wrong.
Or bipolarization of you're not religious, you are religious.
Right.
Because what we're going to argue is that everybody's religious.
Right, exactly. So if we think about religion, first let's back up and think about, okay, what does it mean to worship? So we human beings have this, and again, this is something that every human being experiences, whether you source it in creation by a creator or you source it as, the result of the cognitive processes of a higher ape, I guess. We sense value around us, right? There are things that are good, and human beings uniquely are capable of ordering those goods in certain ways. So like, for example, my dog Goose, bless his heart, he's really fit, he's in great shape for a dog. If he was ever overweight, he wouldn't think to himself, oh, I better not eat all of my food. I need to kind of watch that, right? So he wouldn't be able to subjugate his desire to eat with his desire for health. Both of those things are good. Food is good, health is good, but he wouldn't be able to subordinate, I think that's the word I meant, his desire to eat with his desire to be fit, right? He would not be capable of truly sacrificing one kind of good for another. So human beings are able to do that. We're able to say, no, this is, we just started the Lenten fast ourselves in the Catholic world. So, I'm for the good, because of the good of Ash Wednesday, because of the discipline that the church gives me, I'm going to fast and abstain from meat for this day, right? We are capable of doing those things. So because we are capable not only of perceiving value, but also of putting it in a hierarchy, of ordering it, by definition, there's going to be a value at the top of that hierarchy, right? There's the one thing that we order everything else around. And if it is a truly supreme good, then it will never lose that spot, right? It's always going to be the top thing that I'm going to be striving for, or that I order and subordinate all the other goods in my life around that one thing. That's what we mean by worship. Yeah. Worthship. What is the one thing that is worth most of my time and attention, around which everything else in my life is organized? Okay, now.
Yeah, so exactly. So it's not just that human beings have the capacity to worship, to hierarchically order these values and then pursue some of them above others. It's that we cannot help but do that. It's like to get out of bed in the morning, you have to have a reason to pursue some good other than the good of staying in bed and the comfort, right? Like every action that we take is based on our assessment of the goods that we're perceiving and our hierarchical ordering of those goods, and then our pursuit of certain ones to the exclusion of others.
We all do this. We all build value systems. We all place things at the highest value by which our passions, our mind, and our hearts elevate themselves towards that thing. And one of the examples that comes to mind, for example, is Exodus, when the Israelites build a golden calf. Right. Sometimes we think it's PG-13, it's biblical, it's not that ugly. It's really just, they're just dancing around the calf. Right. Here's the thing. They build the golden calf, right, after having been freed from the oppression of Egypt, going into the desert, and then they erect an idol of which they worship, of which they engage in all kinds of, let's say, inappropriate acts so as to give alms to this thing. First of all, they create the thing with the gold and the treasures and their efforts and minds and hearts that they have. Right. But then they enter into all kinds of acts that help express that religious nature in them, because they hold this thing, this false god, as their highest good. And so express, I think, on a more extreme level, that's what can happen. And it's interesting, especially when you consider what's going on simultaneously on top of the mountain. The giving of the law, the 10 Commandments. And while God is telling Moses, you shall not have strange gods before me, you shall not erect idols for yourselves,
That's exactly what's happening simultaneously at the bottom of the mountain. And if you think about this episode, I mean, this is the handing of the law to Moses, the great lawgiver. This is the establishing of the covenant. This is the wedding day between God and his newly freed people, Israel, and they are cheating on him on his wedding day. Yeah. Like the idea. And so the idea that, well, I don't really need religion, I just want to be a good person on my own. Well, apparently there's a little bit of structure and guidance that's necessary to order this tendency that we have to something that is actually good for us, and that is not going to end up being either a facsimile or a perversion or just a false outlet. Yeah, or in order to actually impart meaning to our lives. And that's the other thing about value. When I perceive these values and I try to find this, okay, what's this one thing that's at the top of the totem pole for me, right? First of all, how do I attain union with that thing? That's religion. We'll come back to that in just a second.
Yeah,
but then when I think about how am I going to attain union with that thing, now that thing has given my life meaning. There is a narrative now to my life. There is a lens through which I can understand everything that happens to me, everything that's going on in the world. And the idea of this one thing being the supreme good, well, it would seem to suggest that I at least tacitly acknowledge that the world exists for the sake of this thing.
And the point is, we cannot help but do that. So the reason the Israelites build the golden calf is because Moses is up on the mountain with God and they can't see God, but they need something to orient themselves towards, right? So what we're saying is that we as human beings, even if we're not in a part of a structured religion, we cannot function without a narrative lens through which to view our lives that gives our lives meaning, and without a highest good that we are pursuing. And what I think the point the Father is making is that even if you don't go to church, even if you don't go to the synagogue or the mosque, you cannot help as a human being but to do that, but to have something at the highest value in your life and to pursue it, even if you haven't explicitly defined what that thing is. I think a lot of people are, I think things shift in and out of that highest spot in their life, and they're governed by their whims and their spontaneous desires, and so they start pursuing things that they don't even know why they're pursuing them necessarily. But everyone does it.
Yeah, we all do.
And that is worship. I mean, even if you're not on your knees in a church building, that is you're worshiping whatever you're pursuing as the highest.
Let me just make one small point, Father, and then I'll hand it over to you. And there's a reciprocal nature with this kind of structuring of value, right? So on the one hand, we hold something in the highest regard as the highest value, but in doing so, that thing also gives us meaning.
Yes.
Or at least we hold it in regard so as to give us meaning. So there's something almost existential happening in the building up, in the leveling up of this one highest good or higher goods that we place.
Because the fundamental question of every human person is, well, what do I mean? And so if I find this one thing that's going to organize my life, well, then I find meaning for myself.